The .NET backend in Glee2 is controlled by ASP.NET Core, and therefore all endpoints and their responses and their requests are controlled by controllers. So let's take a look at a few controllers here in our Glee2 .NET backend. In the current structure, you can usually find the controllers and all of their responses and requests in a folder that is based on that controller. So you can see here in the boilerplate we have employees, and so there's going to be a controller in this employees folder. There's also another folder for status. There is a status controller in the folder. So let's take a look at this controller. Here are a few little things that that are interesting to know about this. The configuration of the endpoints is mostly controlled by attributes that are placed over either the controller itself or over the methods that are inside of the controller. The route attribute is pretty self-explanatory. If you place it over the controller, it will actually it'll control the base route for any of the methods, any of the sub requests, the endpoints that are inside of this controller. So if we had 10 different methods that all do different things and all have slightly different endpoints, they will all have the API/status base endpoint or in the URL. And the API controller is just an attribute that's required over this class to tell ASP.NET Core that, hey, this class is to be considered a controller. You should consider this part of the collection of endpoints. And from there, it's very much like a normal class. It has a constructor. You should inject your dependencies into the constructor. That will be covered in a later video. This method right here is called getStatus, and it's public. It has to be public if it's going to be an endpoint. It's going to return an object that is made up like this, an API information. So it's going to have basically just a version on it. And this one can also be it can take an injected version, but it can also just be a default 1.0.0.0. Well, let's see. Go back to the controller. So so you see here that it's got the word get in it. So ASP.NET Core will automatically designate this endpoint as a get HTTP endpoint because it has the word get in it. You can also, if you don't want to name your methods with the word get or with the word post, put, or delete, you can also use an attribute over the method called HTTP get. Like that. And now this method could be called cmonkey, and it would still be the get method of a API status. So that means that any call to the base server URL /API/status, if it's a get, it'll go to this method. We could create other methods like post, and still those names would not matter at all. They could be called anything, and as long as they have an attribute over them to show that one is post, one is delete, one is put, things like that, then they will get those kinds of it'll route those correctly. Now, if you have I'm not exactly sure what the behavior would be if you had two gets without a separate route. I imagine there would be some sort of runtime exception when you try to start the server. So I don't think it doesn't seem like it would be useful either. But I just wouldn't try it. Now, if you do want to have two gets on the same controller, there is another attribute that I haven't shown yet. So we'll do this just to show. And we'll just do a string get something. Okay, so right now, if we've got these two, I imagine this is going to cause an error, and if it doesn't cause an error, it'd be very strange. But let's say we want to have two gets. What we can do is we can just add the same route attribute that we have up top over the controller. We can add it down here, and we can just add on something. So this would mean that this endpoint receives GET requests to API/status. This endpoint will receive GET requests to API/status/something. This route attribute adds to this route attribute. So you can compound and make the routes more complicated. Now, there are many times when you want to pass things into the route, like I'll add another get, like an ID. You want to be able to get a specific product by its ID. So I'm going to say curly brace ID, and then I could stop there. I'll just stop there, and then I'll go ahead and do public int get. I'll call this one CMonkey just so that we can see that it doesn't matter. Get CMonkey int ID, and then I'll return the ID. So here in this case, we're still doing a get on the same controller. This one is going to respond to any endpoint, any request that has API/status/ and then some number. Anything after that slash, and then it will automatically parse that into an integer, and then it'll pass it in. If for some reason they do status/, actually that may conflict with this. So this one has /something. I'm not exactly sure whether it would cause a conflict, but it would be strange if it didn't, because it may not be able. I don't know. It would be very interesting if it would be able to parse this. This is kind of not part of the example. I'm now just kind of ruminating over this, but what we can do is we can actually do monkey /ID, so that it'll respond to anything status API/status/monkey/ID. That way, it's distinct from something. Now we have a monkey/ID, and then this ID will automatically get parsed into this ID, and then we're just going to return it back out. So you could obviously use this as you can use this in other ways. If you want, you could give this a method body, and then you could go and get the monkey from the repository and whatever else you need to do. So let me see if there are any other attributes that you may need. There are if you ever want to return something from this, which we are here, we're returning just an ID. If you want to return something, just return it. You don't have to in ASP.NET MVC. You have to do like action results, and you have to return things in certain formats. But in ASP.NET Core Web API, it's actually just as easily. You can just return an entire object if you want to. There are a few exceptions where lazy loading is active. You know, if you've gotten something out of the database, then there may be some properties, some collections that haven't been populated yet. They're waiting on you to call them, and then they will populate them at that moment. That's called lazy loading, and which is really helpful, but it's really bad when it comes to controllers. So what we always tell people is to make sure that you never return an entity directly to the caller, to the requester. So if you've just gotten a CMonkey from the database, then you should not return the CMonkey directly to the requester. You should map that CMonkey to a response object. Okay, so let me run over here to the employee's controller, and we'll look at a few of these things in a little bit more detail because the employee's controller is much more developed. So here again, you see that there's a route. Now this route is special because it is using this this kind of wildcard inside the route. This tells ASP.NET Core to use the name of the controller as part of the API, and it actually removes the word controller. So it will actually take this name of this class, remove the word controller, and it'll lowercase the e. So it'll be employees. So anything that goes to API/employees will go to this controller. And again, we have the API controller attribute that just tells ASP.NET Core that this is a controller. And then we have this authorize attribute also. Now the authorize attribute can be set in 3 different levels. It can be set at the assembly level or at the application level, so that every single endpoint requires authorization, or you can add it like it is here to the controller, so that every endpoint on this controller it requires authorization. You can also just add it to the endpoint. So if you have several endpoints but only one requires authorization, you can add it just to that endpoint. So here in this section, you're seeing the constructor. The constructor is where we plan, or we normally set the class up for success for the future. And in this case, we are injecting 4 dependencies. And then we are, well, again, we'll get into dependency injection in another video, but here we're just basically setting these read-only local fields with the value of the dependency so that we can use them later. All right, so we'll move on from there. And this is a post. So usually things are async. You're getting things out of a database, you're dealing with an email server, you're dealing with things that don't necessarily respond synchronously, and so most of our endpoints are going to be async. So that's why you see this public async. And since it's async, it's going to return a task. Task is kind of like a promise from JavaScript. So this is very similar. And so it's this generic. It's a task of type. That's how we say the anytime you've got these brackets right here. This is a task of type new employee response. So in C#, when you're dealing with a method, the type that comes after the public, after the keywords, is the type that the method is going to return. Then we have the name. Again, here it doesn't matter what the name is. We said create employee. It could have been post employee. If we had done post employee, it might not have needed this this part right here. So then we have the type of the request, and we have an attribute here that says that the request comes from the body. You can also say from query, and there are a few other attributes that you can search on Google for that. And here we just have the work that we're doing. We're actually dispatching to a command dispatcher, and then we return the response. This is just a simple object. There's nothing special about this at all. And so this entire controller is full of different attributes and methods that are controlling the flow of the requests and responses coming in and out for our endpoints for the API. And what I encourage you to do now is to go over to the employee's controller and check it out, and try to if you see anything that you don't quite understand, I would Google that. You can see here there's a from route and from body. These are arguments going into the method, and yeah, I would just check this out and try to grok what's going on in this class, and Google anything that doesn't quite make sense, and you'll be well on your way. See you next time.